doing some thinking. So, you know how the Doctor is, they are this big, huge, sci-fi, super genius, complete, absolute hero to many, including myself. But they're not always perfect because nobody is. So I thought to myself, what's the worst or dumbest thing each Doctor has done? Now I'm going to split this up into two videos, and the first one is going to be about the classic Doctors, and the second about the new series Doctors. I just thought, there's got to be something, isn't there? There's always something that each Doctor does that isn't quite in keeping with the sort of big hero god status that we give the Doctor. So I thought, let's dive into it, see what we can come up with. So for the first Doctor, there's a couple of different things. I mean, the first Doctor from very early on is a very different Doctor to what we're used to now. In the first couple of episodes, he's trying to bash a caveman's head in with a rock. He's quite rude, he's quite uptight, he's quite, sometimes just genuinely quite unpleasant, really. But for me, the dumbest thing that this Doctor does, the stupidest thing, is the fact that he sabotages the TARDIS when they land on Skaro in the Daleks. They land on Skaro, they see the city, the Doctor wants to go and explore. Ian and Barbara and Susan are like, no, this is stupidly dangerous, we don't know what's down there, let's just go. You've already kidnapped us, can we just go home? And he's like, nah, we're not having that. So, alright, then goes back in, sabotages the TARDIS. They, we need to go and get some mercury. I'm sure there's some in that city. Ha ha ha. They go down there. So they come down to the city, and that results in the Doctor meeting the Daleks. The Daleks have gone on to be, and still are, the Doctor's greatest threat. Not just the Doctor's greatest threat, but the greatest threat to the universe overall. The sabotaging the TARDIS means that they're taken prisoner by the Daleks and all start dying of radiation sickness, and only Susan is alright enough to go and get the anti-radiation drugs from the forest. Susan's meant to be, obviously she's a Time Lord and everything, so she's a bit more older and a bit more mature, but she's a kid. And they have to send her out to go and get it because the rest of them are too incapacitated, just purely out of the Doctor's reckless curiosity. That tends to be a bit of a theme with some of the classic Doctors as well. And the sort of unease it creates between this already quite tense dynamic definitely contributes to some of the more eggy moments in The Edge of Destruction, which, is a lot of shouting at each other, a lot of pointing the blame and everything, and a lot of that is because of the Doctor being quite reckless and because of him being quite selfish. So for the second Doctor, this one's a bit more difficult because the second Doctor often is, he's the one that's quite clownish and obviously is always 2 steps ahead of the enemies, but pretends to play this fool and everything so that they can sort of lure them into a false sense of security. So he's not really, he's not killed anyone really, not massively. Can't think of any apart from Salamander, but even that's not really his fault. But the one thing I could think of that did stick with me was how he manipulates Jamie in Evil of the Daleks. Yes, it's another Dalek one. So the Doctor is forced to by the Daleks help them with their experiments. They're trying to find the human factor so they can create the Dalek factor, create the ultimate Dalek. It's a whole thing. And the Doctor basically has to conduct these scientific experiments on Jamie without Jamie realising. He is being forced to do it, but he takes just a little bit too much pleasure in it for me. He seems to enjoy it just that little bit too much for me. It's a bit too, laughing and joking around when he's been manipulating his best friend. And Jamie even calls him out for it. Jamie's bothered by this. He says something like, you're too callous or something for me, and the Doctor sort of shrugs it off and it's never really addressed again. If I was Jamie and I was in his position, I'd be feeling the exact same. So it's completely justified, really. And like I said, that it's not the fact that he's doing these experiments because he's being forced by the Daleks. It's how much he seems to be enjoying it and seems to sort of revel in the scientific discovery and the fun of making Daleks play trains and things like that. It's an interesting one for sure. So the third Doctor, there's a couple of things for the third Doctor. I want to talk about a couple of honourable mentions for him actually, because I'm thinking there's a lot of physical assaults on, civilians. And he also does steal Joe's sandwiches, which is a bit of a dick move. But the one thing that really sort of stands out to me is it's a curiosity thing. It's him stealing this Metabilis crystal in the Green Death, which he basically has to sort of go through this extreme quest to get, which then plays a part in that story of breaking the different conditioning, and it's given to Joe as a wedding present. She then sends it back to him when it starts spooking some of the locals of, I can't remember where she is at that point, but she sends it back to him. It's a bit of a long, convoluted story, but basically the Doctor has to return this crystal to Metabilis Tree to destroy and overpower the giant spiders. Now, this in itself isn't too bad, but it's the fact that going into these caves to return this thing, long exposure will kill him, and it does. So all because he's nicked this one crystal, it then, the butterfly effect means by the end of the next series, he's dead. It's pretty stupid in my book. The fourth Doctor. Now, I think the Fourth Doctor is probably one of the more well-together incarnations when it comes to actual decision-making. He might be quite unhinged and quite, loony in that, but I could only think of a couple of things, really, that sort of stand out to me, apart from, again, some physical violence towards civilians. A lot of people will point out to the fact that he doesn't destroy the Daleks, but I think, yeah, there is definitely one, but he mentions how different worlds will become allies because of their hate of the Daleks and everything, and, it's not like it would have made a difference. The Doctor's destroyed the Daleks, forever, a couple of times in different incarnations, It's always, there's been a few final ends for the Daleks and somehow they always come back. So I don't think it would have made a blind bit of difference, to be honest. They'd turned up again. He might have blown up those samples, but Davros has gone, oh well, we'll start again. So I don't really think we can give him that one. What I am going to give him, though, is the whole Invasion of Time plan. Now, the Invasion of Time is a serial from Series 15. It's the finale story. It's the Doctor becoming president of Gallifrey. And during his claim, he sort of starts to be a little bit unusual, sort of play as if he's sort of gone evil a bit, which is quite an interesting thing for the show to do. Now, he is obviously one step ahead of the whole plan. The aliens that invade the Vardans, they get repelled and everything. But the twist is that was actually a dry run for an invasion of the Sontarans. And that's quite dumb. Gallifrey, Time Lords, and he lets a couple of Sontarans run around the capital for a bit. Luckily, they are the worst Sontarans ever. So, the day is saved, but it does just make the Doctor look a bit thick. Now, the Fifth Doctor, there's a few, right? But I've gone with a little bit of a convoluted one, so bear with me. There's a little bit of headcanon involved in this, but there is an objective point to it. Now, Adric is killed in Earthshock, right? That's not really a spoiler. It's been out 4 years. Everyone knows about Adric dying. A lot of people point the blame at the Doctor for not being able to save him because he's in the TARDIS, but there's a reason for it.
Please hurry, Doctor. We must get Adric off the freighter.
The console's damaged.
So all the people that come at the Fifth Doctor for not saving Adric, he was trying, right? Give the guy a break. What is weird is the fact that he doesn't grieve Adric properly at all. At least not in the show anyway. I mean, Big Finish do a bit of making up for that. But in the show, our new TARDIS trio basically sort of stand around going, Adric's dead, and the Doctor's like, yeah, well...
But he wouldn't want us to mourn unnecessarily.
And then they go and piss about in Heathrow Airport for a bit, and it's never really touched on again. It's a bit weird because obviously there was a fictitious relationship between that TARDIS team, but, Adric still died at the end of the day. I'm sure no matter if people have had arguments or whatever, I don't think anybody really wanted him dead. And I think that should have been touched on a bit more in the show. So my headcanon is this. It's because of the Doctor not grieving properly, which is objectively pretty dumb anyway. But this is where my headcanon comes in. He sort of drops his guard a bit. Because he hasn't grieved properly, he can't work out that Turlough's actually quite sus. Because anybody who's watching the Black Guardian trilogy looks at Turlough and goes, nah, he's up to something. But the Doctor's just like, no. And I know that, at the end, Turlough comes good and everything, but there is still that fictitious relationship then between Turlough and Tegan, and the Doctor not grieving, and he sort of just turns a bit of a blind eye to it, really, in a way, because he's sort of replacing Adric with Turlough as sort of another younger son-type figure, mentee, mentor kind of thing. And I just think the Doctor might have been a little bit more self-aware if he had just grieved. Go to therapy. It's okay. There's no shame in it. I mean, where do you even start with the Sixth Doctor? I mean, the coat alone is probably one of the worst things that he's done, except for the fact that he strangles Peri. That's a big honourable mention. I know a lot of people can chalk that up to the post-regenerative trauma, but strangling your mate is still pretty bad, regardless of your excuses, If someone was drunk and they strangled someone, that's still you strangling someone. It's not a reason, is it? It's still pretty bad. But my choice for the Sixth Doctor is just all the other murders that he was doing. We have Shockeye. Yes, he's a mad bloke trying to eat people, but killing him with cyanide is quite brutal. That's like something out of a James Bond film, not Doctor Who. I'm not going to include the acid bath because I don't think that's the Doctor's fault. I mean, the quip at the end is very much uncalled for, but he doesn't push people in there. It's an accident. There'd be a lot of form filling, you'd hope, but it's not his fault. But the main one for me is the genocide of the Vervoids and Terror of the Vervoids, because the Vervoids themselves are genetically engineered to be slaves, and they're rebelling against their evil human overlords. Now, that to me is something the Doctor would be all on board with. He'd be like, all right, let's not kill people, but absolutely, this isn't right. But instead he goes, no, these Vervoids are killing people, so we'll kill them, and wipes them all out and commits genocide. Now, if you ask me, genocide's a pretty bad thing to do, and that's why it's my pick for the Sixth Doctor, to the point where it's even used as prosecution material in his trial in Trial of a Time Lord. And yeah, it just comes across as very hypocritical and just downright just weird, like bizarre sort of move from the Doctor, that. So that's why that's in there. Another Seventh Doctor. I mean, this one's pretty obvious, isn't it? It's the constant manipulation of Ace. Now, Ace is the Doctor's companion, the Seventh Doctor's companion, who joins as this bright-eyed 16-year-old girl, and the Doctor manipulates her on multiple different occasions. You know, in Ghostlight, he takes her back to a source of her own childhood trauma.
We all have a universe of our own terrors to face.
I face mine on my own terms.
And then in Curse of Fenric, he plays on her insecurities, that, you know, that she's nothing, she's worthless. I mean, the Doctor is doing it to break the hold that Fenric has, but it's still really nasty. It's still really horrible to watch. And it continues into the expanded media as well. You know, in the audios, he starts doing it to Ace and Hex. He's manipulating two people. He's always like 5 steps ahead of his closest friends, and they basically just become pawns for his different, you know, malevolent schemes, really. It's an uncomfortable one. It's not very pleasant. You know, it even boils down to the fact that it plays a huge reason as to why Ace leaves. You know, Ace leaves the Doctor because of the manipulation. You know, she either stays on Earth or does whatever the fuck the New Adventures were thinking. Don't judge me. Finally then, the Eighth Doctor. This one's a bit more difficult because, obviously, we haven't got a lot of him on telly. I've gone for an audio pick. I've gone for the story Scherzo. If you're regular viewers of the channel, you'll know that we've been going through the 8th Doctor audios and loving them. And Scherzo is one of the greatest Doctor Who stories ever. It's unlike any other Doctor Who story in the whole canon. It's completely bizarre. It's basically the Doctor and Charlie have become trapped in this universe without time, and the Doctor's reaction to this is quite extreme because it's very traumatic for him. He says to him it's like losing a limb or a sense or something like that, like he's lost time as a concept. So he reacts quite badly to this, but he takes it out a lot on Charlie. Charlie stowed away and like the Doctor thought he was sacrificing himself for her, but she's now with him, and that stirs up a lot of, you know, angsty emotions, to say the least. And he says some really horrible things to her, including the idea that the reason that Time Lords have companions, it's sort of like their pets, they're reminders of death, they're sort of there to keep them humble and things like that. It's very uncomfortable, and just the way Charlie's treated throughout this story, through no fault of her own, it's quite undoctory, but at least he's got an excuse. It's a trauma response to a degree, but he's still just treating Charlie like shit. That brings us to the end of the list, at least this first part of the list. If you enjoyed this and you want to see more, subscribe, because I'm going to do another part for the newer Doctors. If you disagree with any of mine and you've got your own ideas, please let me know in the comments. I'd be very interested to read them. Just let me know what you think. And yeah, we've got loads of other, if you haven't seen us before, we've got loads of other videos ranging from, you know, standard to completely daft. So go check us out, and I'll speak to you again very soon. I'm not very good at doing this bit without Tom. This is his bit.